Hi, everybody. My name is Andriy, and welcome at MS Stage. Today, we're going to talk about Azure computer platforms, containerized web applications, and also the best options and use cases. So let's go. But first, let me introduce myself. I'm owner of a social responsible IT company, UATware. Also, I am Microsoft Most Valuable Professional. I'm conference speaker at different webinars, meetups, conferences related to different technologies. Also, I'm Microsoft Q&A moderator and active member of Stack Overflow communities. I'm having a couple of Azure certificates. I started my IT career around 15 years ago, and first I worked as a .NET developer at those times. I wrote different plugins, different distributed applications, and after that I moved to DevOps, and then I created my own company. I have been working with Microsoft technologies for almost 15 years. I started working with Microsoft Windows Server 2003. And now I'm mostly working with cloud environments. So let's begin. What we're going to talk about today? Definitely about a couple of services like Azure App Services, container instances, container apps, Kubernetes services, and you can see here a little bird on the right, but it looks like Azure Function. Yeah, we'll talk also about the Azure Function. So, but let's first take a look at this picture. Why I started my slide using this, because when we're starting the development of the software application, first we'll need to define the architecture. And as you can see, nowadays, it's still relevant to have the appropriate architecture skills to make the proper software solution and to avoid different mistakes. As you can see, there is different kind of architecture knowledge you'll need to know. For example, it's software architecture design, viewpoints, styles, models, and description and languages, component-based architecture, and other different architecture skills. And as you can see, comparing to the past, all these knowledge are still in use, and you'll need to know all of these to create these modern applications. But I can give you good news that nowadays there are different kind of different use cases already described in the internet, in official resources like Azure Architecture Center, or if you know AWS Well-Architect Framework. And all of these help us to create the architecture based on the previous somebody's expertise. And this is really good in theory, but sometimes you will need to adopt your solution. And let's take a look on this architecture map. You see, to create the application, you will need to consider a lot of different things. For example, workload types, containerization, identity, security, connectivity, monitoring. There are different approaches, different tools for using this, and then you will need to define what are going you to use in your application, in your software solution. And yeah, definitely. So you could use any of them here, and but these all influence in the final decision for pricing, for example, or for the requirements, and maybe other options. And you can ask me how we can deal with this. What are the best options to choose? Yeah, I know that many of you know how to do that, and what applications or services to choose to implement the requirements. But still, what, for example, if you are thinking of what type of services for your containerized application to use? Because Azure have a couple of them. So as you see here in this slide, yeah, there are different type of services to use, and to secure them, to deploy them, to run them, or to integrate with different data sources, or integrate between different services in Azure or in other cloud environments. And here we will go deeper in Azure Compute Services. You can see there are many of them: virtual machines, Kubernetes, container instances, app services, container apps, Azure functions. We won't go with virtual machines. You can definitely deploy your application in container inside the virtual machine, but we are not going to cover this example at this session because this is not the best practice currently. I know many companies did this in the past, and I know that after that they migrated to Kubernetes, for example, or to other options in Azure that allows you to deploy these containerized web applications. And yeah, but we know, well, many of you know all these services, right? And you can ask me, but what are the options to choose? And yeah, we'll make this slide will give us more insights and make our trip easier, make the choose. So make our choice. And you can see that, yeah, this is the algorithm, and this is the schema of how we're going to choose our service in Azure. Yeah, doing full control, yeah, just use virtual machine. No, then you have to other options like Azure App Services. Yeah, if you have the microservice application, maybe it's not a good suit because you can get the spaghetti architecture and deal with this. If you need event-driven architecture, yeah, please use Azure Function, or for example, you can go with Azure Container Apps, the modern way of implementation for the event-driven architecture. If you do not want to make it more complicated and host it in Kubernetes, and if you want to have just full-fledged orchestration, yeah, just use container instances. I think you can see all these options, and you can make a good choice. But there are more features if we go into the scene, yeah, and understand how we can make our application and how we can host it using the Docker images and Docker containers in these services. Sometimes it could be easy, but sometimes it could not. So let's make a deep dive here. Yeah, also I can say that Azure Architecture Challenge, Azure Architecture Center can be a challenge also for you because it gives a lot of insights how to make your architecture based on someone's example, and it gives a lot of hundreds of these examples, and also some of them are already implemented, and you can also see the code for this and reuse it in your application. But it's not so easy, for example, to adopt this for your use case, because some services are pretty expensive to use, and some of them are not suitable, for example, because of the security requirements, or maybe some of the services don't have such performance. So that's why we are going to make the deep dive into the Azure services that can host your application in Docker containers. And the first one option is Azure App Service. I think many of you know how to deal with this and what it is. And I can give you more deeper understanding of what App Service is. As you can see in this picture, the App Service is the implementation of IaaS. If any of you used IaaS Survey before, you maybe know how to host this application in Windows Server in IaaS, and what are options there, and how to make the binding for the self-certificates, and how to choose some options for this. And Azure just the platform as a service, and it for the App Service, and it gives you the option to host your application in IaaS. And in this example, you definitely, if you use the Linux container, you host the application inside the App Service, and definitely use some virtualization there. And how it built, I mean, the App Service. First, there is a load balancer, and then on the right, the traffic goes to the IaaS ARR, reverse proxy, and then it goes to App Container. And as you can see here on this slide, there are two containers, App Container and Kudu Container. For example, if you deploy just the Linux image, Linux-based, not the custom container, you see that you make the deployment of your code inside this App Service. And when you're connecting to the via Kudu, you can see a code. And this code is also in this App Container. How? Because the Kudu container and App Container share the same volume that is connected to both Kudu container and App Container. And that is why also the logs, you can see the logs in Kudu container, and the same logs are in App Container. The App Container writes these logs, and you can see this in Kudu container. This is the really interesting implementation for the App Service. And pretty same thing is with the custom container. And you can also use the SSH to connect to your app container directly, but you need to add some additional options or some additional steps to do that. So that's the simple description of the App Service. And why we can use this Linux or Windows container. So Linux container, I think, so for my opinion, it can be used everywhere, especially if you do not have the specific requirements and legacy stack. It's the pricing, it's cheaper and has small image size, and you can make the SSH access and use any Linux-based image. Why you need to use the Windows. For example, you have .NET framework applications that needs to be ported into the Docker container and used inside the app service. Yeah, that's I think that's the only option. As I'm Microsoft Q&A moderator, I can share with you some examples of what are the common challenges of using the app service. First is making the connection between the app service and Azure Container Registry. Yeah, and the option for this is use managed identity, but some people are missing some steps and they are not able to connect Azure Container Registry with app service. Another challenge for many users is to use the app service with Docker containers. They are using different custom images that could not be properly built. Yeah, then host. Also people want to make the troubleshooting for the containers, and app service also has a really cool thing that I can say we can use is to host your application in app service and read the logs in the portal, and just using this logs option, you can go there and see all the logs, all the streaming logs from the Docker container, and to understand what's happening there. And using this is a good option for app service and for making troubleshooting. So move on. And the next option for hosting the application inside the Docker container is Azure Container Instances. And Azure Container Instances is the container group, let's say. It's like a pod in Kubernetes that you can use this terminology there here. For example, in this slide, you can see two containers. It could be front end and back end. And you can just only open one port to the outside world. And why we can what are the options for this, for hosting? Yeah, Linux and Windows. Linux, it's also really easy to use. Yeah, and you have some benefits there, like pricing small image and VNet integration. And what also the benefits for this is that you can use Linux for almost all your applications, .NET Core applications. Yeah. For Windows, you just need to, maybe it's the only option is to use .NET Framework application in containers and host them in container instances. The drawbacks for container instances is that every time when you're running your application, you will need to wait. It could be seconds, tens of seconds when it downloads the image, yeah, and then run this image. For Windows application, it could be not the seconds, but tens of seconds, because Windows images could be gigabytes. And these cause the problem of the start of this container, and could be timeouts. As you can see here, we can mount the volume to these Azure Container Instances, and it's Azure files, and the files are stored there. Why you can use these container instances? Because it's really convenient and easy to make the deployment. So move on, and the next our service is Azure Function Apps. As you know, so many of you are using the consumption plan, but there are different options of using the dedicated plan for Azure Function. Why we can use it? Because you could use your Azure function for long processing. And in this case, a consumption plan, has limitations for this running for 15 minutes, maximum. And if you need to run your background processing for a long time, more than 15 minutes, you can use these dedicated plans and host your application inside the Docker container using the Azure function. Unlimited timeout duration, as I mentioned here, and you can scale 20 to 100 instances. And there is no problem with warm-up. And also you have the VNet integration. Unfortunately, Windows is not supported, and I think there will be no support for Windows for this. Also, for why you could use this, because, for example, one of the options, Azure has introduced SQL triggers. What does it mean? For example, there is a change in the table in a SQL, and you will need, for example, some record was created or updated, and you need to make some action for this. For example, to pull this data and send it to another database, to another system, for example, a CRM system or any third-party systems. And then you will need to integrate your Azure function with a SQL trigger, with a SQL database, and process this data. You can do this only with the functions that are not in consumption plan, with a dedicated plan. Then you will be able to make this processing, make this happen. This is the option for this. This is the example. And you can definitely integrate it with VNet to secure your Azure function. And this is the really good thing for event processing, like I mentioned before. So let's move on. And Azure Container Apps, I think many of you tried this service, and I think you understand that, it's really cool service that helps to make the deployment easier, even easier than Azure App Service. What does it mean? So why Azure created this Azure Container Apps service? Because the Kubernetes for many people is pretty complicated, especially for developers. And why you need to learn about the Kubernetes and learn how to deal with this, what to do with this. You just need the service to host your application. That's it. You do not want to know about the services, deployments, ingress, these APIs of the Kubernetes, and CRDs and many other things. You just need to deploy your application and start it, and that's it. That's why you have Azure Container Apps. It's using Kubernetes behind the scene, but you do not need to make all these challenge things to make the deployment of your application. And let's see what features it has. It's Docker runtime. It means that you can easily deal with these event processing complicated things more easily. And so you can see in this picture, there is a sidecar there. Auto-scaling, advanced auto-scaling, that you can make additional option for this that you didn't have, for example, in app services and container instances. Advanced deployment, A/B deployment, blue-green deployment, canary deployment. There is nothing there, nothing in Azure App Services, and it supports any Linux-based image. You can scale to 0. There is no such thing in Azure App Service, to scale to 0. Yeah, and I can say that it's really convenient service, and it's just plug and play. You just deploy this applications or couple of applications inside the container apps, and that's working. Windows is not supported, and I suppose that it won't be in the future. And you have a lot of integrations, and I see that Microsoft makes a lot of improvements and features in Azure Container Apps. For example, for the last couple of months, they introduced the session affinity. They added there. Also, Microsoft added different improvements into Ingress. Unfortunately, there is no SSL implementation of or TLS implementation of communication between these container apps, between each other. But I know that some people require this. However, it's not supported. And let's see then how these services can integrate with Kubernetes, because we understand that, for example, one part of the application of our application can host in Kubernetes, and some part could host in different services. Yeah, especially when we make the integration between different parts of different solutions. Yeah, it could be. For example, how to integrate app service and function. This is only one option to use the VNet. Yeah, to just integrate the VNet, Azure App Service or function inside the VNet, and the same VNet hosts the Kubernetes service, and they can communicate between each other. So another thing is the Azure Container Instances. Why we need to integrate it? For example, we have Kubernetes, and we have some workloads there. But in our application, sometimes we have spikes. To create the node, it's a bit time-consuming. Time-consuming, I mean, it could be a couple of minutes to do that, but we need it faster. To do it faster, we connect these virtual nodes in Kubernetes, and this is the container instances. And when you need to spin up or to scale your application in Kubernetes, Kubernetes just deal with these virtual nodes and do that pretty fast. It could be seconds or 10 seconds, and it's really it's faster rather than using additional nodes. It's really a good thing to implement, to use when you need to cover your demands. But for example, if you need the constant load, it's better to use regular nodes, and to spin up them in advance. For example, you know that in a couple of hours you will have more traffic and you need more resources. Then you have to spin up these nodes and scale your application. But for spikes, it's a really great thing. So then let's move on and take a look into the use cases. It's a really interesting thing. What are the common scenarios for the app service? When you need to make to host the application, a single application container in Azure, just use Azure App Services. And if you need to host somewhere through-tier application architecture, just use App Services. And you can even make this more complicated if you need to scale it in different regions. For example, you may know that Azure had a problem with its Australia East region. It was a month ago, and we had one of our clients had resources in Australia East, and we had the backup regions of Australia Southeast, and the solution was hosted in Azure App Service. It was a 3-tier application, and we made failover to the Australia Southeast using these app services, and we didn't lose any data. And that was pretty fast. We spent around an hour to understand what is going on and how we can switch to another region without losing the data. You need to secure the application, and you can use also the app services, because Azure has implemented standards, security standards, ISO 27001, and other standards related to security. Also the HA that I mentioned, and resilient and scalable application. Yeah, it has different features to support this. Azure Function, we talked about this a bit, about the use cases. Yeah, what you can do with this, like processing the data, for example, coming from IoT Hub, you need to process it fast, or you can get the data from the database using the SQL trigger and put it somewhere else. Or you have to build some small APIs, just sending emails or sending notifications. Yeah, good choice for this. And many other use cases, especially if you're using event-driven architecture. Azure Container Instances, better to use these when you need some task automation, and for dev test scenarios, like making some like testing some application, and I mean to implement the tests, QA tests for this. And also the CI/CD agents, like we did with Jenkins, and some small batch processing and simple web apps, like hosting a single page application. It's not the only option for this. And use cases for container apps. This is the modern way if you want to use the microservice architecture, but not so complicated. And you want to start it faster. Then I would say that better to use Azure Container Apps rather than Kubernetes. It's easier to deploy, easier to test, easier to build your POC or MVP. And if you also want to test this event-driven architecture and event-driven application, it's a really good choice. Another thing, and you do not need some complicated scenarios for your applications, and for microservice application. What about CI/CD? And for CI/CD, you can use the simple flow. How it look like? For example, you are having your repository, your GitHub. You write a Docker file, committed. Then you have a trigger configured in your CI/CD system, and then you get the code from the GitHub. Then your CI/CD system, for example, Azure DevOps, make the build. Then push your image into the Azure Container Registry, and then you can deploy this image in any of the environments, to be compliant with 12-factor app. One build, many deploys. And then you can also make this deployment to other environments, and you can just merge the Docker container with the code, with the configuration, which is the best practice considering 12-factor app. And yeah, all these services that we mentioned, container apps, app services, container instances, functions, they support this. And let's take a look into the features for these applications. For example, Azure Container Apps, yeah, it supports auto scaling. It's using the CADA. It also supports HTTP ingress, use Envoy. Yeah, we mentioned that it's using Kubernetes behind the scene. That's why it has many features that is used in Kubernetes. Yeah, you can split traffic, Docker supported. Yeah, we mentioned and I explained what it is. Also, long-running job, yeah, no problem. Just host your application and that's it. And also, the Azure Container Apps, they support many new features. Microsoft Azure introduced for init containers. It was a really interesting case when you have to run run some code or run some process before starting your application, and that's why many users require this thing, yeah, to migrate to the Azure Container Apps, for example, from Kubernetes. Yeah, Kubernetes, we know that all of these supported, but splitting traffic, it's not so complicated, but you need to do that using different type of third-party applications. Yeah, to make this happen. I mean, not to using like splitting traffic from endpoints, but I mean splitting traffic between different services or based on some metrics. Yeah. Dapper, yeah, you can implement it, but it will be a manual thing. Yeah, you should install this first. Azure Container Instances. Yeah, there is no auto scale for this. Yeah, and HTTP ingress is supported, but you do not have the SSL enabled for Azure Container Instances, for example. Yeah, Dapper is definitely not supported, split traffic no, and yeah, long-running processes, I can say not supported. Yeah, you can do that, but it won't be long-running jobs. Yeah, it's for short-running operations. Web for containers, many of the things and features are supported, but related to long-running jobs, yeah, you have this feature like jobs in Azure App Services, but Microsoft recommends to move it to function. And for function, it's also based on app plans, and it's use the same infrastructure, let's say, as App Services. It has different features, and functions also support like long-running jobs. Yeah, but there are different benefits and running function comparing to the Azure Container Apps, if you're talking about long-running jobs, but Azure Container Apps is the modern way of running the complex applications. But if you need the simple code that will make this processing, yeah, it's better to use the Azure function. And what I can say that first, you shouldn't look into the services itself, but you have to make the decision of what service to choose based on the architecture, your requirements and needs. And you have to understand the features of each service, what could it give you in type of features and benefits. And you have to avoid the decisions that it's easy to, it seems so, yeah, it's easy to implement, but you have to see all the picture and understand all your requirements and the drawbacks of each service. And at the end, I can say that you can take a look into the materials I used. And if you want to know more about the modern applications, how to use Azure App Services, Azure Container Instances, Container Apps, Kubernetes, functions, you can reach me, for example, in LinkedIn and ask me any questions you would like to, because my Microsoft MVP specialization is app services and all this application that could be hosted in containers in different services that I mentioned in this talk. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day and see you then. Bye.